Thing yourself. I don't know how to do that. Okay, so thanks for coming. The first of the fall semester development workshops. And we're going to lead off with Dan Bromley. And I want to introduce Dan to you because most of you have never met him before. And that's kind of interesting because Dan has been in this building longer than all of us put together. He was on the faculty here from 1969 to 2009, which is 40 years. So his retirement year was also the year of the department's centennial, which Dan was instrumental in organizing. He served as chair of the department twice, and I want to mention a couple of notable things that happened during his chairships. The first, actually, you were not probably were you chair when we moved?
I was.
Yeah. Okay. So during his first chairship, the department moved from Ag Hall to this building and occupied this building. So a lot of what you see around here is the consequence of work by Dan and his colleagues during that time. It's kind of interesting. During his second chairship, the university took a look at the building and they sent the auditors around and they found that there were more empty rooms than we deserved. And they tried to take some away from us, and Dan fought them off so that this building is exclusively AAE, and that was another terrific accomplishment. Along the way, he also led the charge to change the name of the department, and this happened a very, very long time ago. We were agricultural economics. We made a bid for applied economics. The econ department, I'm pointing at you, Jeff, but you weren't there, I know. Yeah. You had left, otherwise you would have supported us. The econ department said, no, applied economics is too broad. And so we ended up, long story, with a compromise, the current name of the department, but Dan was really, I think, quite rightly, very, very energetically promoting the move to applied economics. Along the way, during his career, he supervised 44 PhD dissertations and a bunch of masters as well, published a whole lot of books, did a lot of other things that you can find pretty easily on the internet, and served for how many years? 44 years as editor of Land Economics, which is the journal which is kind of the crown jewel of the department as well. So you may not know Dan, but you are kind of part of the history or the legacy that Dan has been really instrumental in creating in this department. He's been around this department almost half of the existence of the department. How about that? So, okay, without further ado, Dan, why don't we turn it over to you?
Okay.
You can figure out how to dismiss that thing. I'm a Windows idiot. I should have said that in the course of the centenary, Dan also produced a book which is the history of the department. It's called Wisconsin Becoming. In here it has all the secrets of the department, all of the skeletons in the closet and everything else. So if you want to know all of that dirt on the department, you can actually get this book, I'm pretty sure, for free by walking up to maybe Erin's office and asking her for a copy. So there you go. There's a plug. If you sort it
Who's
out.
our expert? Where's the person who spits on the connector? How do I get rid of this?
Just click on the bottom.
Do I spit on the screen?
No, not quite. Is it frozen? Oh, here. And then
F5 maybe?
F5. There you go.
Thank you. Okay. I'm so happy to be back. Have some, I believe, some relevant stories to share with you. Most people come in here and say they want to introduce you to their great model, at which point I say that's a contradiction in terms. There's no such thing as a great model. All models are just efforts to improve on the state of art. So there's no model here, but I believe there are lessons, and I think there are lessons that matter for those of us who are interested in development and what have you. So that's the point here. I want to stipulate for you what I take economic development to mean. We rarely define it in explicit terms. We just say we do development. I want to insist to you that development is a process, and it's a name that we have applied, economists have applied, to a set of structural changes that took place in England beginning around 1725, which then came to acquire the name the Industrial Revolution. But what we really observed was profound structural change, social transformation, And so I want to stipulate to you that when I'm talking about development, I'm talking about 6 or 7 or 8 things, and here they are. Outmigration from agriculture driven by technical change, emerging labor surplus in urban areas, that follows from that. The growth, therefore, of industrial activity, not necessarily huge factories, but urban-based manufacture of clothing, furniture, what have you. So it's a gradual structural change from activity in the rural areas, which in the old days was the only economic activity there was, to a general urban-based economic activity. And in fact, when we look at Western Europe in the 1600s, the way we develop, the way we think about and measure development is the proportion of the population that is urbanized. So that's kind of a metric for what, in a sense, we often mean by development. Rising per capita incomes, because agriculture is a constant returns to scale industry, and or activity in industry is usually thought of as an increased returns to scale industry. You get improved nutrition because agriculture, along with shedding labor, has adopted technology which makes it more effective, more efficient. You get falling death rates because of advanced medicine, because urban-based medicine is usually better than rural-based medicine. And then, because of cultural lag, ultimately you get declining birth rates, which is the cultural thing, and that's the demographic transition. Death rates fall first, culture catches up, and then birth rates fall. And then you get population growth, and you get continued urbanization, and you get ultimately enhanced equality of opportunity. So that's what I mean by development. Development is not just putting a school someplace or building a highway. That is not development. Development is a structural transformation in the way and the place where people live. So that's kind of what we're about here. I want to make a distinction between a nation and a state. I say a nation is a unit of Cartesian space, recognized by the United Nations, in possession of a capital city, and in control of an international calling code, right? Henry Kissinger was angry when the EU came along. He says, what's their telephone number? Who can I call? So a nation has an international calling code. Sudan's is 233, I think. Anyway, there will be something called government, which is a noun. A nation is an empirical phenomenon to me. One can see a nation on a map or from the air. Nations occupy space. I'm not interested in nations. I'm interested in states. A state is a political community. This is my definition. Political scientists have ideas too. A state is a political community embedded within a nation. A state is a noumenon, that is an idea rather than a phenomenon. You cannot see a state. You can only see the effects of something called governance, which is a verb. It's an activity, isn't it? Government is a noun. Governance is a verb. The essence of governance is problem solving. Coherent states exist to solve problems. That's my sort of stipulation. Then you often see nation state, which is implied a going concern, what I call a coherent going concern. Going concern is kind of an antiquated terminology. John R. Commons used it a lot. A going concern is a group of people united by a purpose. That's what a going concern is. A coherent state is a group of people defined for the most part by a shared purpose. So that's the stipulation on which we're upping. Our task, the economist's task, is that we often work in nations that are not yet states. South Sudan is an example of this. Afghanistan is an example of this. Yemen, Somalia. These are nations that are not states. Or we work in nations that appear to be states, but they have failed to bring about something that we would recognize as development. So my candidates, there are many, many of them, Zimbabwe, South Africa, Syria. These are failed states. So I make a distinction between a place that has no state and a place that seems to have a state, looks like they're trying, but they're not doing it. So here we come to Sudan. On my screen, this is orange, so we'll call this orange. This is green on my screen. Sudan used to be the largest country in Africa. It's a little bit bigger than France, maybe 20% larger than France. And I drew in here a line that is very important not only for my story, but for the larger stuff that's going on in the Middle East. There's a nice book by Eliza Griswold called The 10th Parallel, The Battle Between Islam and Christianity, or something like this, okay? The 10th parallel, you trace that line across Africa. You start in Guinea, there are two Guineas, Guinea-Conakry. You go off to the east, right over the top of Cote d'Ivoire, top of Ghana, top of Benin, Togo, scrape a little bit of Niger, and you cut right through the northern part of Nigeria. You know what's going on in northern Nigeria? Young girls are being kidnapped, okay? Right along that 10th parallel. Goes underneath Chad, off to the east, and guess what? It slices this former Sudan, right here. Geography has this strange way of informing what's going on. This is the 10th parallel. This is Islam here, and this is traditional and Christianity down here. I don't know that anybody said that it would happen on the 10th parallel, but look at where this divorce took place. This is where the oil is. South Sudan has all the oil. Sudan doesn't have any oil. Sudan has a seaport. So these two countries that emerged out of a civil war, now there's pipelines that go from the oil area in South Sudan up here to Port Sudan, which is where all the oil goes. So you have Islam in the north, and you have traditional African religions and Christianity to the south. And it is ironic that it's right on the 10th parallel. Okay? So there have been two big civil wars in Sudan. The second one started in 1983, September. Sharia law was imposed in Sudan. I happened, through bad timing, to be in Khartoum at the time this happened. Civil war didn't break out immediately, but the government imposed Sharia law. Those of you who've spent time in international hotels in capital city know that the bar is the place where all the action is. It's not just a bar, but it's a huge lounge area, what have you. And I came back from work one day and the bar was closed in the Hilton. And that means not only the literal bar, but huge seating area. And I asked the maitre d' what's going on. He said, he kind of shrugged his shoulders. Well, they forced the Hilton to shut the bar. And the next day, the rumor has it, they dumped all the alcohol in the Nile River. So this is what happened in September 1983 when Islamic Sharia law was imposed in Sudan. John Garang created what's called the Sudan People's Liberation Movement and also Sudan People's Liberation Army. Garang was a PhD from Iowa State in ag economics. He was brought to the U.S. by a missionary family, and he spent his senior year in high school either in Northfield, Minnesota, or just outside of Northfield. Went to Grinnell, got an economics degree at Grinnell, went to Iowa State, studied under John Timmons, who had been a student here under Parsons. So we have some sort of connection to John Garang. So they fought this civil war for 20 years. And finally, 2005, there was a comprehensive peace agreement, probably motivated by Billy Graham. The group called Samaritan's Purse had been operating in Sudan, refugee camps, helping deal with problems. And one of the first visitors to George Bush the Younger was Billy Graham, and insisted that the U.S. stop this carnage against Christians in this Sudan place. Even today, the president of South Sudan wears a black cowboy hat in homage to George Bush and Texas. So that's kind of the origins of the birth of this country, in a sense, was to deal with this religious conflict that was deadly and problematic. There was a referendum held. They became independent on the 9th of July, 2011, so they just celebrated their 10th year. And nothing has happened. And I say, in a sense, what did happen was the U.S. and other countries were very anxious to liberate oppressed peoples from Islamic tyranny, as they would define it. But once it became an independent country, they washed their hands of it. So the last decade meant that none of the donors, the World Bank, UNDP, none of them, the US, the Brits, the Norwegians were always interested in helping South Sudan. They've stood on the sidelines. And the mystery is, those of us who think donors are interested in development have not shown up. And the question is, why? Why aren't these agencies doing something? Okay, we'll come back to this. I want to just give you a picture of how grim it is. Those of you who've been in Africa might have some perception. My guess is you have no perception of what South Sudan looks like, and I don't want to bore you, but you must see how it is so that you can understand our frustration, who are dedicated to fixing it, understand our frustration that the donors just stand on the sidelines and watch. Population of about 14 million, maybe 12 million, we're not really sure. Basically oil, this number won't mean anything to you, but we'll get to it. 60 million barrels a year of oil production. Most of it goes to China. A nominal GDP of about $5 billion. Again, that number means nothing until you begin to look at this. Oil revenue at $3.1 billion accounts for 85% of the government budget. There is no economy in South Sudan. It is oil. This is a classic oil state. Here's a number you will be able to relate to. Gross national income, maybe GDP, per capita, $321. If there are 365 days in a year, this means it's less than $1 a day. And 85% of the population is rural. So I'd like you to try to imagine a country, 10 million people scattered across the countryside living on less than $1 a day. So oil revenue is about 85% of the budget. Here's an indication, 186 miles of paved road in a country that is larger than France. That's the distance from Paris to Calais, or if you like a little more local distance, you drive south to Chicago and turn left, and you get to Gary, Indiana, you've gone about 186 miles. That's how much paved road there is in South Sudan, okay? In the rainy season, between May and October, the roads slippery, trucks fall off the roads. And finally, the last indicator, the Corruption Perception Index. That's wrong, it's the ranking by Transparency International. The worst in the world at 179. They're the 179th worst country in the world, just below Somalia. So I think you see what, not only some physical things, but you see also some state-related indicators. How about a few other things? I don't want to bore you too. I'm sorry this slide, but you must see some of this. Percent rural population, 81%. Average across the rest of Africa is 57. So you see this scattered population. These three indicators here. Open defecation, sorry, this is indelicate, but you must follow it. Drinking water, basic sanitation service. 95% of the people in South Sudan do not have access to basic sanitation services. That means an enclosed latrine. That's all they mean by basic. There's a public health problem here. Women will not do what men do, and that is stand up against any wall and urinate. Women don't do that. So during daylight hours, if there's no place to take care of that process, they don't do it. And that means you get high urinary tract infection among rural people, okay? Rural women. So the public health implications, this is just not a bad number. It has important public health implications. Birth rates about on line with the rest of Africa. Death rates, female, male life expectancy, worse. Lifetime risk of maternal mortality is twice what it is in Africa. The maternal mortality rate, 2.5 times the rest of Africa. And most of Africa is not a place where you'd brag very much about maternal mortality, okay? Children out of school, 62%. Here's an important public health issue as well. Next to the bottom line. Female children out of school, percent of female primary school age. 67% of young girls are out of school, okay? compared to 19% across Africa. Now, the standard story is families won't pay for girls to go to school beyond the 5th grade, 6th grade. What's wrong with that story? What happens to girls in the 5th grade, 6th grade? Okay, puberty sets in. Schools without bathrooms, schools without running water, schools without private places for girls to do what girls have to do at the age of 6th grade, 5th grade. What do? They drop out of school. So all the development literature talks about families not wanting to pay school fees for girls. I say no. It is a development thing with serious public health implications and also education thing. So that's kind of what we have there. A few other statistics. Borrowers from commercial banks, 1.2 per 1,000 adults compared to 65 for the rest of Africa. Direct foreign investment is 0. Final consumption is 65% of GDP. That's because there's no industry out there. It is only household consumption, which is nothing, but it is the dominant share of GDP, is just household consumption. And on and on and on. We can come back to these numbers if you wish. I'm sorry for all the detail. But here we have, in a sense, what I call the problematic legacy of liberation struggles. South Sudan was born out of a liberation struggle against Islamic rule in Sudan. And my point to you is that successful revolutionaries make really for bad governance. Okay? Successful revolutionaries make for flawed governance. Zimbabwe, South Africa, South Sudan, Iran, Egypt, Russia, and China. Some of you may object to me putting China there. We can discuss that. There are a few exceptions. France, the US, and I suppose Vietnam. Ian, you might say that Vietnam had a...
Object to China, you better
What's that?
If you're going to put China on one list, you better put Vietnam on the same list.
On the same list?
Whichever one you choose.
Well, I don't want to argue with you about Vietnam, but anyway, I'm leaving China on this list. We'll worry about Vietnam later. The logic is obvious. Liberation struggles, revolutions, are top-down military operations, aren't they? Do as I say. Governance is a collaborative endeavor that says, come, let us do this together, because by my definition of a state, it is a collaborative process of jointly lifting this thing up. So I say economic development depends on coherent governance, not ruling down. So there's my assertion about the difficulty in creating coherent governance and therefore statehood out of liberation struggles and civil war, as it were. To me, getting development underway occurs within the geographic confines of a nation, but it can only be animated by a climate of collaboration between those who govern and those who are governed. I call this the Citizenship Exchange, the essential component of which is the tax bargain. The tax bargain creates a climate of mutual leverage between those who are governed and those who govern them. And the leverage comes as follows. When I pay part of my income, even a small part, to the government, I have a claim on their attention. And if something isn't working for me, I can go to them and I can knock on a door and I can say, where is X? And if they say, we don't owe you anything, then you'd have a legitimate claim on that. So that's what I mean by leverage. Development is a process of mutual leverage in which the citizens have a claim on the power of the government, and the government has a legitimate claim on the income of the citizens, the households. There's a game here, isn't there? As households become wealthier, if they are taxed, no matter how small, the revenue flowing to the government goes up a little bit, doesn't it? And government's always interested in increased revenue. So taxation of income, however you structure this, lifts people up and makes the government pay attention to it. So this is my animating factor of what I call development. Taxation gives the household a legitimate claim on the government. Taxes tie households and governments together in an economic relationship in which both parties gain as the economy improves. And the economy is nothing but the income of the constituent households inside of the nation state. That's how I say you get development going. That's why I said to you when we began, we don't create development by building schools. We don't get development by building highways. We don't get development by building dams or electricity generating facilities. We get development by this linkage, which ties the well-being of households to the well-being of the government. Yeah, Jeremy.
I mean, it seems like South Sudan and maybe Guinea provides another example of this, where you have a resource that can fund the whole government.
Yeah, yeah,
Or 85% of it.
yeah.
And that means the tax bargain is mostly irrelevant. This is probably true of Alaska
Yeah.
somewhat.
Less so now, but you're right. Yeah.
But like in Guinea, the bauxite mines are enough to
Of course.
pay the army, pay the police, pay the,
Right.
pay the features of government. And so you don't have to care about the traders.
Absolutely. So we hear about the curse of oil. That's right, Jeremy. We hear about the curse of oil. Ian likes to talk about it in terms of the macro stuff, right? The exchange rate problems and all of that. But there's a more insidious problem going on with the curse of oil or the curse of bauxite or the curse of anything else. When you have a mineral, let's basically think of it, they are, first of all, location specific. The minerals come from over there. I've showed you where they come from in the border between Sudan and South Sudan. They come from right there. So not only is this an enclave economy, usually it's fenced off from the ordinary people. The money flows directly into the treasury. It doesn't flow through households to be taxed, and some of it sent to the government. So right, as you said, the government can get all it wants just by this revenue coming into the treasury. And it has satisfied its needs. And then the worst part is there's no mechanism for revenue mobilization out in the countryside. So you get 50 kilometers outside the capital city, there's no connection, there's no economic connection. And so then people out in the countryside, maybe market towns, whatever, they have to come to the center to beg for money to build a school or to do something. And in that begging gift regime, you get corruption and all of the bad stuff. Are we okay, Jeremy? Is it?
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly how it works.
That's how it works.
I guess I'm not sure it's a necessary component of it. But anyway, go ahead.
Well, okay.
Not that I can come up with a counter example of, gosh, here's Gabon and they do it great. No, they don't.
Yeah. I think the thing we're both interested in is how to tie government together with the citizens. Huh? That's what we're
Right.
talking about. And I've said that it's what I call the Citizenship Exchange, and a key element there is taxation. Let's use what we understand here as incentives to tie these two parties together, because as you remind us, under the current regime with oil proceeds or bauxite or whatever is exported, the central government doesn't need people out in the countryside. It does not need them. And you will not get development if you don't pay attention to them out in the countryside, because they are the ones who actually will carry this thing. That's my hypothesis. So here we are, kind of a summary. Development is undermined by the oil economy, in addition to the usual problems of exchange rates, blah, blah, blah. It's predatory on development. It creates an enclave economy, and there's no citizenship exchange, and that's what I call the mask of citizenship.
Hey, Dan?
Yeah,
I'm not a development economist.
you don't need to be, that may help.
Well, no, but I say this because it's a sort of ignorant question. Was the area that is now South Sudan on this trajectory for the past century? Or how does it compare to what is now Sudan
Yeah.
and so on and so forth?
Southern Sudan was always ignored. Okay, it was always ignored by the rulers in Sudan. Okay, so South Sudan, what became South Sudan, was always the rural backwater, the poorest part of the country. The economic activity, the wealth was sort of in the north, okay? And oil didn't figure into any of this through the Civil War. Now by 1981 or 82, they knew there was oil in South Sudan. The oil companies knew it. So, and it turns out the oil was in the South. So it could have been, and I think it's probably feasible, that the Southerners thought, aha, we have oil, we can afford to fight this war with those hated guys in the North because we'll get our own country and we'll control the oil. So that probably was part of the calculation. But you don't need oil, Andrew, to kind of get this thing, because in a sense, the people in the South were animated by this oppression that they were feeling from the Islamic North. Have I answered your question? Okay, let me give you an example. Ethnic tension. We'll talk about ethnicity in a minute here. There are two dominant ethnic groups in South Sudan, the Dinka and the Nuer. They're cattle keepers, aren't they? South Sudan is a pastoral place. And there's ethnic tension. And one of the charming motivators of ethnic tension is stealing of cattle so that a man can get a wife. You've heard of bride price, I assume, okay? No father is going to give his daughter away to marriage without 6 good cows. Or if she's a good cook, he might demand 9 or whatever, okay? That's bride price. This is a cultural structure of most pastoral society. So there's no real economy. There's no way for a young man to earn an income because there are no jobs to be had. So he steals cattle. And he doesn't steal cattle from his own people. He steals cattle from the other guys. So Dinka boys steal Nuer cattle. Nuer boys steal Dinka cattle. So this quaint little marriage market, in a sense, plays a really important role in ethnic tension. So here we sit. Actually, I just had a Zoom session this morning where the World Bank finally acts like they're going to do something. But the World Bank has been timid to do anything. They stand on the sidelines. The UNDP, minimal activity. The bilateral donors, Norway, the US, the UK, they don't want anything to do with South Sudan. Only the IMF, ironically, has been helpful. They have given 100 million, 150 million to South Sudan during this COVID problem to deal with this crisis. Let me get moving forward here. I'm going to close with a word about Afghanistan because it's probably on your mind, and it relates. It's what I call the Afghan stew, with or without the Taliban. The Taliban, in one sense, is immaterial. Yeah.
I hate to stop you.
No, that's good.
But before you leave
Yeah.
South Sudan and go to Afghanistan,
Sure.
So the donors are saying, you know, USAID, we can't spend any money here because everybody we give money to is corrupt, and
That's
the money
right.
will just get eaten.
That's clear.
And
Yeah.
and so you're saying that's not helpful. And I can see one view where, yeah, right, this place needs help.
That's right.
Give money, and yet there's another view that says, well, if the money's not actually going to do any good, and it's just to line the pockets
Precisely.
of people wearing cowboy hats.
Totally agree. Totally agree. That's right.
Shouldn't, you know.
Yeah. That's right. It's taxpayer dollars. I mean, the people in South Sudan are angry because the donors won't come, and I keep reminding them, look, those are taxpayer dollars that they're sending to you guys, and most government employees in South Sudan didn't get paid for 6 months. So they were working for 6 months without any salary because the money had been lifted, stolen, diverted by somebody else. You're absolutely right. But there's a way to deal with that problem, and it seems to me the donor community has a way, and actually we did this with our IMF negotiations, this group I'm working with. We were neutral third parties between the IMF and the government. So they're trying to negotiate terms of agreement by which they're going to send $150 million to South Sudan for COVID-related relief. And this research group that I'm with, we were in the middle of these Zoom meetings beating on the government to change its behavior so that those guys in Washington would give you money, and beating on the guys in Washington to be a little more generous with the guys in Juba because they needed the money. So my point in this, Jeremy, is that there is a way for the World Bank to come to them and say, okay, guys, we know there are problems here, but we have some ideas. And I was going to bring this up, but I'll do it now. We think the World Bank does development. Wrong. No. I know it's called the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, but I don't think the World Bank does development. The World Bank does projects, okay? And we learned the other day that the World Bank has a project they want to bring to South Sudan on agribusiness development. And I'm thinking, this is an economy with no market, with no internal markets whatsoever. Why are they coming with an agribusiness development project? There's no agribusiness development. My point in all this is the bank has projects sitting on the shelf. And just the other day they said, oh, our household survey unit would love to come to South Sudan and bring in household surveys. I said, oh, very interesting. For what? What do we learn from that? I don't want a household survey unless it's tied to an agricultural development project or something. So what we've learned in this period is the bank has a lot of projects sitting on the shelf, and they're looking for countries to put their projects in. That's bizarre because I thought countries ask for development assistance to do this, and to do this. Huh? So, my point, Jeremy, and it's a long answer, my point is there's a way for the World Bank to sit down, just like the IMF did, and said, okay, guys, you want our money? You got to change your behavior. And we're going to sign letters of intent. We're going to sign memoranda of agreement. You agree to do this and this and this and this, and then we'll give you our money. I used to think the IMF was awful. Now I suddenly admire them because they know how to grab a country where it needs to be grabbed and say, we'll help you, but you got to change your behavior. And I think that's your point. But the donors haven't even done that. They haven't had an honest conversation with the leaders of South Sudan. And that's frustrating. Yeah, Ian.
Just an informational question, I guess. With all that oil revenue, do they have anything like a sovereign wealth fund or a stabilization mechanism?
No, they don't.
It just goes into the current.
Goes into the current account,
yeah.
And it is misappropriated. Some of it's been stolen. Might be in Geneva by now in bank accounts, okay? And as I said, many civil servants went for 6 months without being paid. And they kept showing up for work. So it is clear, it is serious corruption, theft. And there's violence. There's no doubt about that. Because of this ethnic fighting between the Nuer and the Dinka. But that's all. And it's funny, I was funded for a year by the U.S. Institute for Peace, which is a branch of the State Department. And these people, it's what I call the peace industry. These people at the U.S. Institute for Peace, they think you get a country to settle down by holding meetings and having conferences to be nice to each other. Okay, that's what the U.S. Institute for Peace is. Oh, let's get these Dinka boys and these newer boys together who are stealing cattle. That's, you know. And I said to the U.S. Institute for Peace, no, that's not the way you do it. The way you do it is you create livelihoods, plausible livelihoods for people so they don't have to steal. They don't have to conflict with it. So there's a whole peace industry out there that seeks to try to get people in the same room. I say, why don't you devote more of your attention to creating plausible livelihoods? Okay? And the peace industry, it's huge. A lot of high-priced people make a lot of money holding meetings. And you know what the best predictor of civil conflict in Africa is? The number of unemployed males between the age of 12 and 25. I made a nasty joke about models a minute ago when I started. But if you want to build a model explaining civil conflict in Africa, you look at that. And I did it for the Arab Spring countries. The best predictor of countries that would blow up in the Arab Spring was the years of delayed marriage across the Middle East. And the 10 years was the average delay in marriage from maybe the 1980s to 2000, okay? Delayed marriage, imagine this. That's an explanatory variable for Arab Spring revolts? Of course it is. Boys can't get jobs. Boys can't get a wife without a job, not stealing cattle now. We're talking about Egypt. We're talking about Tunisia, okay? Guys can't get a job. They can't get a wife. Family formation falls apart. And the government offers them some meaningless job up in the corner of a building somewhere. Okay? That's what creates unrest. Okay, what I call the Afghan stew, just very briefly, and then I'll stop. 14 ethnic groups, Sunni, Shia, Sufi, Islam playing around in here. There's no economy. There are a lot of minerals, which will be very dangerous. And I think the worst thing is the neighborhood. Now, in the old days, the joke was map makers would, there was terra incognito, and the joke is that over here they say, here be dragons. Well, Afghanistan is where there would be dragons. Okay? Look at this. How'd you like to live in this neighborhood? Iran to the west, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan to the north, Pakistan to the right, and the Arab Sea down here, okay? This is not a happy neighborhood. Nothing good will happen in Afghanistan. Nothing. Because these are former Soviet republics, these three. You think Russia isn't interested in what goes on up there? You got Iran here. Pakistan turns out to have been playing a double game with the creation of the Taliban. So this is a neighborhood that is destined to fail. Let me just quickly do the serial tragedies of Afghanistan. 1979, there was a coup. Soviets invaded to support a communist ruler, Babrak Karmal, 1980. Then the U.S. enlisted Pakistan to help train and arm guerrillas to defeat the Soviets, and thereby creating the Taliban. Talib means student in Pashtun. Students came out of the madrasas, which were Islamic schools for young boys. So the Pakistanis joined in helping us create this thing which we now seem to be worried about. The Soviets, after 10 years, gave up. They decided they couldn't defeat the Taliban. Osama bin Laden arrived after being expelled from Sudan, of all places. Then the airplane attacks in September of 2001. Took the U.S. 2 or 3 months to destroy the Al-Qaeda base. And then we looked around and we saw women and girls were being mistreated. Oh, why don't we try nation building? Well, it took us 21 years to realize that mission creep rarely works out well. Okay? So we went there for reason A, and we then decided we liked reason B. And so we pursued 20 years of reason B, which is be nice to women and girls. We're going to change your society. And we finally decided this was not a good strategy. My point is, Afghanistan is problematic. Let me sum up. Achieving development in stateless nations, you must look for binding constraints on income generation. I learned a lesson. I was hired by USAID in 2009 to head up a team by a consulting firm to develop an economic recovery strategy for Iraq. Well, in 2009, you didn't go into Iraq. So we had a team. I stayed in Amman, Jordan, and my team went into Baghdad. And the team met with 5 or 6 representatives from the different sectors in Iraq: the land market, urban housing, transport, fuel, agriculture, several others. And we asked these sector leaders, these business people, to tell us the binding constraints that keep your sector from being viable. In other words, economic diagnostics. What stands in the way of your success? We didn't ask them to solve their problem. We asked them, you tell us what prevents you from being successful in your sector. The reason we did this is that the UN and the World Bank had put together a document about this thick, 150 pages of project ideas for Iraq. And our team said, not so fast. We're not interested in what the UN or what the World Bank wants to do. We're interested in what the country needs. That's what I call economic diagnostics. And I've often joked, if I was the president of a country and the World Bank walks in with a document like this, called a poverty reduction strategy paper with 65 things that ought to be done, I would say, you get the hell out of my office. You figure out the 3 most important things I must do, and then you call my secretary, and we'll have a nice little chat. Oh, make it 6. 3 things that must be done, and then 3 things that would follow on those, okay? And these donor agencies don't work that way. They have projects they wish to push. So that's what I mean, looking for binding constraints on economic, focus on sectors, identify regional growth nodes so that government reaches out into the countryside, develop sources of local revenue, create markets to pull food production out of rural areas. A lot of agricultural development projects go, oh, we'll give you some high-yielding varieties of seeds. Oh, we'll give you some new machines. What good is that if there's no market for that increased production? Stress public goods, community development foundation, empowerment. So I think that's about it. Creating development is more difficult than we ever imagined. And I hope that in going through this, you'll see, because South Sudan is one of the worst case scenarios, and now we've got Afghanistan. And for those of you that are starting your professional career, my prediction is Afghanistan will never amount to anything during your work life. That's my prediction. Mark my words, you just follow what happens to Afghanistan. You can think about South Sudan if you'd like, but Afghanistan is going to be in the news. Don't expect anything to happen. Sorry to be so negative. So, Ian, I'll stop.
Thanks, Dan. Well, we've got plenty of time for discussion, questions.
I think that, thank you for the presentation. I think that what you say about Sudan, South Sudan, is that there's not enough intervention. And also in Afghanistan, you chronicle a failed intervention. So it seems like on one hand, you say, you know, that the international community should intervene more.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, you highlight the fact that, you know, there's 20 years of a military and development intervention in Afghanistan hasn't worked. So where do you land on this spectrum? You know, more intervention or no intervention?
Let's change the language.
Okay.
Let's not use intervention. I know what, you know, you just grabbed the word. That's a bad word. Isn't it? So let's not, we're talking about as assistance.
Okay.
Is that okay with you? We want to provide assistance. My complaint with the World Bank is its motto. You know what the motto is of the World Bank? Working for a world free of poverty. My God. That's like working for a world free of terrorism or something else, okay? So assistance is important. It must be instrumental assistance. I don't want you to think I don't care about people living in poverty. Poverty is not an actionable development goal, if I may, right? So I want more assistance, but I want it to be collaborative. I want to sit down with the leaders of these countries like we did in Iraq and say, tell me why the land market here doesn't work. Teach me why in an oil-producing country you're always running out of gasoline for your cars. Right? Tell me why the electricity is shut down 14 hours a day at random intervals. I think somewhere I said, development is problem solving. Those are problems, aren't they? So that's assistance. It is smart diagnostics. Am I responding to your question?
Okay.
So it's not let it leave alone. That's been my frustration for 10 years. And it's on my mind because South Sudan in July just celebrated its first decade of independence, and nothing has happened. Huh? And I'm watching the chatter on these fora. People are getting really angry, and they're tired of waiting. Okay? And the donor community has contributed to this. So it is aggressive assistance, gentle assistance, that helps countries identify binding constraints. That's why I joked about, you know, they come in with a document like this. When we went into Iraq, a document like this, with I don't know how many projects that the donors sort of had on their shelf that they would love to give to Iraq. No, that's not assistance, that's imposition, isn't it? Am I responding to your concern? Yeah?
You know, I think we're sort of into an interesting discussion here with what Azaz is raising, because it does seem that there's a lot of conditionality here, right? I mean, assistance only makes sense if you've got the institutional and administrative structures that will enable it, right,
That's
to
right.
happen. If those don't exist, then
Yeah.
then it's kind of an infinite regress, right?
Yeah.
Where do you begin?
Yeah.
And in that context, I guess, you know, you had nice things to say about the IMF, and I've recorded that because I never heard you say
I
that
know,
before.
well, we all get religion late in life, and this is my last minute conversion, and I'll tell you why in a minute. Go ahead.
You're an advocate of IMF capitalism.
I know.
But,
No.
but, I mean, inform us. Tell us a little bit more about what the IMF is doing that you like relative to the other
Right.
things. So, I mean, my guess is they came in and they said, here is a budget, you figure out how to spend it, but tell us more.
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah, I mean, the IMF did great damage throughout Africa in the 1980s. That whole structural justice stuff was awful. So I've always been very down on the IMF. And so we were involved in Zoom sessions. We met every other day, I think it was, between 8 in the morning and 10. So that's like 3 and 5 in Juba. So we had IMF people in Washington. We had them in Dar es Salaam, which is the regional East Africa office. We had them in Juba. We had the Bank of South Sudan. We had the Minister of Finance. And then we had those of us from the Ebony Center, which is a research unit in Juba. And the IMF basically said, we have some rapid credit, RCF, rapid credit facility money available to you, $50 million, this was maybe a year ago, to deal with COVID, to deal with the loss of markets for South Sudan. And they said, but this will entail some reforms on your part before you can get the money. Fair enough, okay? If somebody comes with $50 million, you'd like some behavioral change. So the IMF would draft letters of agreement, and then the Minister of Finance and the Governor of the Bank of South Sudan, they would have a discourse. And those of us from the Ebony Center were watching, and at times we would say to the IMF, you guys need to be more strict with them. Because I see weasel words in the agreement like may or might or something. And we said, you from the IMF was being gentle with these people, said, you must insist on this reporting, staff management training, technical assistance. So the IMF was a real partner in helping this country. And remember, most countries have a long history of civil service administration. South Sudan has existed for 10 years. Most of those people were in the military until 5 years ago. They have no cultural experience with management and governance and all that stuff. So that's what I mean by purposeful guided assistance. So we were tougher on the government than the IMF wanted to be, and we were tougher on the government. That is, and the World Bank could do that with its projects if it wanted to. But the mode of operating of the World Bank is they just have a project and they put it in the country and they come back in a year and see how it performed. So I think the real answer, Ian, is the collaborative hand-holding and sharing along the way.
In other words, they're trying to break into the circle at the point where they can actually catalyze the creation or the operationalization of things like effective administrative procedures and institutions.
That's right.
That's what you're saying?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So the IMF offers technical assistance. They say, we'll help you manage your, South Sudan didn't have a cash management unit within the, they didn't have any idea where their cash was going. So the IMF says, we need to create a cash management unit. And by the way, we can offer you some technical assistance. We'll borrow from Ghana and from Kenya right next door. We'll help you create a cash management unit. Just little things like that. And most of those guys in South Sudan said, yeah, you're right. We don't have that. And we now understand that we need it. And when you have your government employees go 6 months without being paid, there's great incentive to get this thing fixed. So that's a collaborative thing, which is different from the way the World Bank likes to do projects. And that's why I'm kind of fond of the IMF, because they were gentle. And maybe the fact that Kristalina Georgieva from Bulgaria sort of came out of the old Soviet empire, so she's kind of attuned to how you make a market economy emerge out of nothing. So there's kind of a whole attitude of the IMF that to me is much more encouraging now. Jeremy, have you?
But on this, sort of what the other donors are doing, on the one hand, you kind of told us, oh, well, they're not giving any money.
They're not giving any money at all.
And on the other hand, like, if they gave money, it would be the wrong kind. It's like, they're maybe just like the oil. The oil is not very good money.
Yeah.
And the US, the UK, and the Norwegians turned off the spigot. Okay, no more project money, because the only way we know how to give it is what you're suggesting is a wrong way.
It's probably worse than that, Jeremy. You know what they do? They won't give it to the government, they'll give it to NGOs. So in these developing countries, you have NGOs hanging around, waiting to get projects, okay? We call it third-party implementation. That's the worst possible thing you could do, because in a sense, you're saying, we don't trust the government, and by the way, we're not gonna help you get any better, we'll just channel our project money to the NGO. We'll let this NGO manage school things, we'll let that NGO manage health clinics. You don't get the government engaged in this process of governance. And so I hate to see NGO implementation. If I had my wish, I'd get rid of every NGO in the world. Just obliterate them. They exploit young people who are idealistic, they don't pay them any
So
wages.
great to see the
Okay.
capitalist.
Yeah, right. No, but I mean, seriously, NGOs fill a niche because of state failure. When apartheid left South Africa, there were something like 25,000 NGOs in South Africa. Most of them were liberation struggle kinds of things, but a lot of people were put out of work when apartheid ended in South Africa. So to me, you do not want third-party NGO implementation. You want it embedded in the government because it's a learning process. And how are the government people going to learn if all of the implementation is done by the NGO sector? Well-meaning college graduates from the US over there in South Sudan trying to figure out what in the world to do. Yeah, Alberto.
Hey, not to add too much to an already bleak situation, but there's another income stream that could be complicating the whole thing of, like, in the case of Afghanistan, like the poppy seeds and heroin and all these organized crime, easy money for young kids. How do we start rooting out that? And it has a market in developed countries that is part of the whole reverse.
Let me see if you want me to solve Afghanistan?
Well, you're so good in South Sudan.
I would do that for a price out there, but no, I can't give you a prescription. But I'm just saying that Afghanistan is a disaster, and it will be for most of your working life because of the perverse role of opium. Okay, the farming structure there, it's all cash. The neighborhood, not good, bad, really bad neighborhood. If you had to pick a place to live, Afghanistan is the last place, that's the last neighborhood you'd buy into, okay? So that's, and the Taliban, I don't care what they think, they are not a governing operation. Do I?
No,
I kind of blew you off, I'm sorry. Andrew.
So I'm trying to figure out what your stance is. So I'll ask you a provocative question. Thinking about places like South Sudan and Afghanistan, do you see economic development as you define it at odds with self-determination?
What do you mean by self-determination?
The model of development involves a lot of people with the money and the stipulations, and the idea of what a societal governance structure should look like.
Yeah.
And that might not be where a lot of these nations and or states would wind up on their own.
That's right, yeah. Democracy's overvalued, overrated in some respects, if I'm picking up on.
Well, I just want you to riff on it more than anything.
Tell me more. You say self-determination, meaning getting us out of their life? Is that what you mean by self-determination? Or do you mean within the country self-determination by the
I guess I
world.
mean like, who gets to set an agenda? Who gets to decide who
Ah,
gets to set the agenda?
Precisely.
How does,
That's governance, isn't it? That's what a state does.
but so is the international community properly a surrogate state for nations without states?
Not at all, not at all. The international community does not like to meddle in state building because they think that's so localized. Okay? Like, they love to talk about nation building, but that is incoherent. The international community is reluctant to go in and do much kind of state building because that means, look, you gotta legitimize all these factions out in the countryside. You gotta pay attention to them, right? That's what state building is all about. That's why I say, you never see a state. You can't see it on a map. It is what people do. That's what state building is. Yeah? It's how they behave. And that's why I like the tax bargain, because it makes the guys in the capital city pay attention to the peasant out there who has paid some taxes and expects an answer.
So over the course of your working career, what has been perhaps the closest thing to a success story of state building?
Darn
That's bleak.
Right?
That's bleak for this situation then.
Well, life is tough, Andrew. The story is, if you leave China off to one side, over the last 30 years, what has been the success in lifting people out of awful livelihoods? Almost nil, okay? So when you see data about, oh, poverty has disappeared, incomes have gone up, it's because of the effect of what China has done over the last 30 years, okay? The growth there. But I look across Africa, and I've been working in Africa for a long, long time, and I hear this thing about how, oh, Africa's all this great place, and I look around, and I don't see it, okay? Where I do see it, maybe a place like Ghana, is because they got a little bit of oil suddenly, okay? But I believe that the prognosis is one of grim reality. Doesn't mean we should stop, but, yeah, Ian.
So
You probably, go ahead.
I'm gonna beg to differ a little bit on
Yeah.
the poverty reduction
Okay.
thing. China's the big part of the story, obviously, but we can point to countries that have been successful, profoundly successful in that. And
Vietnam?
certainly Vietnam went from almost last in the rankings to
That's right. No,
very
that's-
close.
I told you
Bangladesh, Indonesia, several other Southeast Asian nations,
Yeah.
which account for all of the rest of the net poverty
Non-China,
alleviation in the
yeah.
world that's taken place. Sub-Saharan Africa has pulled all the numbers back down the other
That's
way.
right.
So, so what's the takeaway from those? Well, you know, those are countries that have generated productive jobs for low-skilled people.
Yeah.
And that's clearly the first rung on the ladder of all of the things that you talk about as kind of making the glue that sticks the economy together, because then
Right.
people are invested in the activity.
Right.
They want stability because that's part of their own personal
Sure.
project
I
as
agree.
well. And so, you know, it's easy in a sense for a place like Bangladesh to do that, because FDI comes in and builds factories and creates jobs and people flood into the factories. But then what's the counterpart for a country like South Sudan or even Afghanistan?
What's the what?
What's the counterpart? I mean,
The count-
you know, is there a prescription that we can obtain from those countries that might apply?
Now I want to introduce a little culture here a little bit, if I may, in this story. Economists don't like to talk about culture. I find in South Sudan the absence of urgency. Okay? The absence of urgency. And I tease them about it. And they say, yeah, you're right. You know, we're pastoral people. And I say, what does that mean? And they say, well, we kind of work it out. Okay? And my work in Southeast Asia, and I'm kind of into Oriental despotism and all of this stuff, my work in Southeast Asia says, if you live in an irrigated society, it is chop, 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 boy. It is mind the weeds, mind the water, mind the irrigation system, pay attention to it. Every day, a rice farmer in the Philippines or wherever, he gets up and he's out on the ditch to make sure that somebody hasn't stolen his water, make sure that the bund, what we call the bund, is in place, the terracing is in place. When you live in an irrigation society, by God, you pay attention every day. in Africa, South Sudan, well, it may rain tomorrow, but it also may not. And I'll think about doing something tomorrow, but if it doesn't happen tomorrow, it can be okay. It's kind of the joke where you say about manana. I'm sorry to kind of pick on it, kind of a Latin kind of thing, but tomorrow will be good enough. And so I think in South Sudan, I think parts of Africa, there's a lack of urgency because they can live as they have lived, and they will get by. And it's never been very good, but they know how to keep it from getting much worse. And our experience in Southeast Asia is that those people would like it to get better. And there's a difference between working hard to make it better and working to keep it from getting much worse. And so that may not be the answer, but you know, I remember when Ken Shapiro, who'd worked in Tanzania, when he first went off to Southeast Asia, I said, okay, Ken, you're going to be shocked. Because you think, this was even in the 80s, you're going to, and when Ken came back from Southeast Asia, he said, my God, they're miles ahead of what I know from Africa. Even then, miles ahead, weren't they? I don't know if it's culture, I don't know if it's resources, they're all tied together.
Yeah, or if it's opportunity.
Opportunity?
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's kind of where my question
yeah,
is going.
that's right. I mean, there are more opportunities in a temperate kind of wet climate region than, I mean, in South Sudan, you've seen the numbers, it's really hard. Yeah.
So I want to push back on your kind of democracy thing, because your tax bargain is this story that the government has to care about these people in the hinterland because they pay taxes.
Yeah.
It seems like a functioning democracy has that feature too, is that I have to care about you people who don't live anywhere near the oil, or who live up country, or at the end of a long road that I might have to pave in order to get your vote. And you mentioned Ghana as a potential success story. And
I didn't, yeah, but getting better, I said, yeah, go ahead.
well, but the vibrant democracy in Ghana
Yeah.
does seem to be providing that kind of thing. You have these fights, you know, the first set of competitive elections were all about primary schooling.
Yeah.
And then the government provided that, and then they were about secondary schooling, and then they were about the quality of secondary schooling.
Yeah.
And these are all goods that the government provides.
Yeah.
And in some ways, the discovery of oil has meant that there isn't that same tax bargain.
Yeah.
Like if you're in northern Ghana, you probably are not paying a lot of taxes.
I know.
The government doesn't actually need you, but they do need your vote. And
Well-
so I guess I want to put forth the idea that maybe a competitive electoral process might provide some of what your tax bargain requires.
At some point, yes. Remember, democracy is not about voting. Democracy is about reason giving, not about voting. It's about reason giving. And it is about staying engaged in the game when you've lost and the other side's reasons have prevailed. So the question I have is it possible to build a tax bargain to link people more closely with their government in the absence of what you and I would call democracy? And I think the answer is yes. There are mechanisms for mobilizing reason giving that would solve this citizenship exchange. That's why a minute ago I kind of said, well, you know, I'm kind of lukewarm on, quote, democracy, because let's face it, there are many places where, this doesn't sound very nice, but there are many places where full democracy doesn't lead to very good outcomes. And if you want an example, how about looking around our own country? Okay? I mean, if we're talking about failed states that are democracies, the United States is right up here in terms of failed states, isn't it? All right? Is that controversial? The U.S. is damn near a failed state. Now that's, maybe there's a microphone.
You're standing next to
We are a crippled democracy, aren't we?
Mhm.
It's run amok, and we've had 200 and X years of experience with it. We went through a period where we didn't have a state, called the Civil War, right? So we had one of those. And you know what, the Civil War here is still being fought. I mean, if you look at a lot of the political, I don't want to focus on the U.S. We are damn near a failed state. So I'm no fan of democracy as a remedial solution. Yeah. I'd rather focus on reason giving, and I think there's a way for the people out in far western South Sudan to express their concerns to the guys in Juba, to make sure that the schools are improved or that they get a nice highway or something. I don't think you need voting.
Yeah, but you want them to pay taxes. Those guys in Juba are just gonna eat that and put it in their Swiss bank account. So, like, why should they pay taxes,
Yeah.
right? Thanks, Dan.
Yeah, Brent. Yeah, I mean, the IMF will
Right,
help.
I mean, I guess.
The
that's
IMF will help us
the
fix
tax-
that problem.
The tax bargain is broken there, clearly.
Oh, yeah, there is no tax bargain.
And whatever democracy bargain might be there is also
Yeah.
broken. So I
The
I just-
IMF could help us get a tax bargain in South Sudan. And I had a little piece on here, Aga Khan Rural Support Program. I worked with them in Pakistan. They go into a village and they say, okay, what do you need here? And they say, wow, geez, we'd love to have a well. Aga Khan says, okay, that's a nice idea. Tell you what, you create an executive committee, half women and half men, and you agree to create a taxing jurisdiction so that everybody in this little village pays something into the kitty. And when you have your executive committee set up and you have your $27 that you've raised from all these poor households, you call us up and we'll come back and we'll work with you on a well or whatever you identify. Now that kind of looks like democracy, but it's just instrumental development, isn't it? But what it does is it gets everybody in the household bought in to this enterprise, okay? Everybody pays, even if it's a paisa, they pay. And then you have ownership, let's say, at the level. And now you can't scale that up, obviously, but that's what I'm talking about.
We should probably call a close to that. Thank you, Dan.
Can we get one more question from the,
Oh, yeah.
the woman who
I'm
saved the
trying to understand.
technology? She deserves a question.
Sure.
No, I think I kind of see what you say about democracy, and that's not the only method to, create this contract of feedback between government and citizen. So I'm trying to understand what other system could facilitate something like that. And I keep thinking about Rwanda, because Rwanda has no democracy. They say they do have democracy. There's a pure dictatorship since the liberation. But it seems like, the government cares something about the population. They try to do something. So I was wondering, like, in your opinion, what other kind of mechanisms that could actually facilitate that? And what is your analysis of a country like Rwanda, where,
Like
the
what
dictator,
country?
Rwanda?
Oh, yeah, Rwanda.
That seems like, the dictator seems like a benevolent one.
Everybody's
right?
favorite
Say
country,
that.
then all of a sudden, whoop.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and is it lack of oil, lack of natural resources that actually forces dictators to care about citizens?
The answer is Nelson Mandela. We need to clone Nelson Mandela. We need to put him in all these African countries. Okay? So charismatic leader who's trusted, who's loved, who has credibility, and can act like a benevolent dictator, and can, if you'll excuse me, kick ass and take names. Okay? We're gonna do this. We must do this. And then he or she goes out in the countryside and says, come on guys, we have to do this. And that's what I said. Governance is about, let us do this together.
But that doesn't
Revolution
seem
is about, do as I
sustainable.
say. Governance is about, come on, let's do this together.
Isn't that Rwanda? That is exactly Rwanda, with a
Well,
little,
so-
happy political refreshing on the side.
I know, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, we gotta keep, it's hard to keep our values out of some of this stuff, I know. But there are stages of progress towards this happy state.
Okay, now I'm gonna say we should call
Yeah.
it, but you guys can carry on afterwards.
Yeah.
If I had known that Dan Bromley was gonna come here and defend the IMF and attack
I know.
democracy and
It's
attack NGOs,
hard to
I would have advertised it much more broadly.
No, actually, you spend enough time with me to know that I've always been the contrarian.
Right, yeah. Thanks, Dan, really appreciate it.
Thank you. So I think
Okay.
I know how to get this done.
I've got to turn off the
Yeah.
recording first, so
Okay.
let me,
You go
don't
ahead.
mind.
Yeah.
Well, I can still remember how to do that.
Thanks for your email. I'm gonna reach that out and reply.